Nobody told Ava Reyes that the medicine would get her killed. She had been on Orvath Prime for 3 months. The station sat at the edge of 4 trade routes, which meant it sat at the edge of 4 different kinds of suffering. Displaced workers from the Drenai collapse, refugee families from the Velhari border disputes, children of species that had no homeworld left, living in the maintenance corridors because the council said the upper levels were for registered residents only. Ava was not a soldier. She was not a diplomat. She was 23 years old and she had a crate of medical packs, a translation earpiece that worked about 70% of the time, and a stubborn belief that sick children should not have to prove citizenship before receiving fever medication. She had set up in Corridor 7, which the station logs called a utility access route, and which everyone actually called the lower market. It smelled like rust and cooking smoke. The lighting came from strings of orange work bulbs that someone had hung between the pipes years ago and nobody had taken down. Ro had helped her carry the crates. He was a Dravaki, broad, 4-armed, dark-skinned, and gentle in the way that very strong things sometimes are. He worked the docks and knew everyone, and had started helping Ava 2 weeks after she arrived simply, because she had asked him if he was hungry before she asked him for anything else. That morning she had already seen 14 families, a Velhari infant with a respiratory infection, an old Drenai man whose translation implant had shorted and who had been unable to communicate with anyone for 6 days. She had sat with him for an hour, not because she could fix the implant, but because he needed someone to sit with him. The enforcer arrived at midday. He was counsel, black and gold armor, the kind that said, "I do not need to explain myself to you." He was Garathi, one of the species that had dominated the council's enforcement arm for generations. Tall, 4 eyes, a jaw that looked like it had been designed to make other species feel small. He looked at Ava's crates. He looked at the families gathered around her. He reached down and picked up a medical pack without asking. Ava said, "Those are registered humanitarian supplies." He did not respond. Under Council Accord 14b, civilian medical aid in non-restricted zones does not require enforcement clearance. He set the pack down on top of the crate, which was his way of saying the crate was now his. Ro, standing 10 feet back, made a small sound, a warning. Ava heard it and did not move. She said, "I am not going to step back. Those supplies belong to the families in this corridor. If you want to file a seizure order, I will wait while you file it. I know how long that takes. I have time." The enforcer looked at her the way a wall looks at a fly. Then he spoke into his collar communicator. Then he waited. 2 more enforcers arrived 8 minutes later. The families in Corridor 7 began to disappear, not running, just slowly, quietly finding reasons to be somewhere else. Ro did not leave. He stood with his 4 arms at his sides and his face very still. They detained Ava at 12:31 station time. She did not resist. She asked twice to be told what the charge was. She was not told. Ro watched them walk her around the corner. He waited 5 minutes. Then he took a small personal recorder from his chest pocket, the one he used to send voice messages home, and he walked to the corner and looked. What he saw, he recorded. He did not understand all of it. He understood enough. He walked back to the crates. He sat down on the floor next to them. He sat there for a long time in the orange light with the medical packs that nobody was coming to collect anymore. Then he stood up. He took the recorder. He went to the courier office on level 2, the one run by a Drenai woman named Saf who did not ask questions and had a direct channel that bypassed the standard council communication filters. He paid her everything in his account. He said this needs to go to Earth, not Earth Station Office, Earth, the actual planet. Saf looked at the recorder. She looked at him. She had seen a lot of things pass through her office. She could tell the difference between things that were dangerous and things that were important. She said 12 hours. Ro said thank you. He walked back to Corridor 7. He sat down next to the crates again. The orange lights hummed above him. Somewhere further down the corridor, a child was crying, and then the crying stopped because someone was holding them. Ro did not know what Earth would do. He did not know if Earth would do anything. He had met 3 humans in his life. Ava had been the third. The first 2 had been traders, loud and funny and very bad at Dravaki dice games. Ava had been different, quieter. She had learned 6 words of his language and used them badly and beautifully, and she had always made sure the children got the medicine before the adults, because she said children cannot wait the same way. He sat in the orange light, and he waited for something he could not name. 12 hours later, the message was on its way to Earth. Ava was already gone. The footage arrived on Earth at 4:09 in the morning, routed through a Drenai courier channel that the Council did not monitor because the Council did not believe the Drenai had anything worth monitoring. It was flagged automatically. It was reviewed by a duty analyst within 6 minutes. The analyst sent it up the chain. The chain moved fast, which meant something inside the chain understood what it was looking at. By 6:00 a.m., Director Harlan Webb was in the operations room. He watched the footage twice. He did not say anything the first time. The second time he watched it, he had a cup of tea in his hand that he forgot to drink. At the end of the footage, he set the cup down very carefully on the table, as if the cup had done nothing wrong and did not deserve to be put down hard. He told the room to archive everything and to restrict distribution until further notice. Then he went and stood at the window for a while. Outside, Earth looked like Earth. Cities, weather, people going to work. A planet that had been navigating the edges of galactic politics for 60 years, trading carefully, speaking carefully, always aware that it was new to a galaxy that had been running without it for a very long time. Webb had spent 31 years in his position. He had handled incidents before. The Garathi trade embargo, the Velhari border dispute that nearly became a shooting war, the slow, quiet humiliation of watching council inspectors walk through human ships with the same expression someone wears when checking the cleanliness of a place they never planned to stay. This was different. He knew the difference between an incident and a message. The council had not made a mistake. They had made a point. And the point was, we can do this and there is nothing you will do about it. He went back to the table. He told his aide to send one message to the council's diplomatic office. The message said, "We have received the footage. We are reviewing our position." That was all. His aide, who was 26 and had been in the job for 8 months, waited for the rest of the message. Webb told her that was the whole message. She sent it. Over the next 4 days, the council's diplomatic office sent 11 follow-up messages. Webb did not respond to any of them. 14 alien ambassadors requested urgent meetings. His office acknowledged receipt of each request and said scheduling was under review. The footage had not been released publicly yet, but things leak. By the 3rd day, fragments were appearing on human networks, blurry captures, second-hand accounts, whispers moving faster than the original. By the 4th day, every human on every station and colony and ship in the galaxy had seen it or heard about it. The response was not what the council expected. There were no riots. There were no protests outside embassies. Human workers on mixed-species stations did not start fights with council representatives. They got quiet. They went about their shifts. They were polite in the exact way that is not actually polite. On Orvath Prime, the human dock workers, there were 11 of them stopped eating in the shared crew canteen. They started eating in the maintenance bay. Nobody said anything about it. It was just a thing that happened. A Garathi senior officer named Drakul, who had authorized Ava's detention, and what followed it, addressed his council peers on the 5th day. He said the incident had been handled within established protocol. He said human civilian activity in non-designated zones had been increasing and required correction. He said the silence from Earth confirmed that direct action produced the results the Council required. Councillor Yessa, who was Seluhari small, blue-green, with large dark eyes that had watched galactic politics for 60 years, sat in her tier and said nothing during the address. Afterward, in the corridor, a colleague asked her what she thought of Webb's silence. She said, "I think we should be very careful about what we call silence." Her colleague did not understand what she meant. She did not explain. On Earth, Webb called a meeting. 12 people. A room with no windows, no recorders, and no network connection. He spoke for a long time. He showed them charts that had taken 3 decades to compile: shipping routes, power consumption logs, personnel records, resource flows. The kind of information that tells a story when you lay it all out flat on a table and look at it from above. When he finished speaking, he produced a single sheet of paper. He passed it around. Each person read it. Each person signed it. Webb collected the sheet. He held it over a small metal tray. He lit it. They watched it burn. Nobody in that room looked afraid. They looked like people who had made a decision that had been waiting a long time to be made. The kind of decision you do not rush. The kind you wait for until you are certain, and then you do not hesitate. Webb thanked them for coming. They left one at a time, a few minutes apart. He stayed in the room alone after the last one left. The tray held a small pile of ash. He thought about a 23-year-old woman in a gray and white volunteer uniform, handing medicine to a child in a corridor with orange lights. Then he picked up the tray and carried it to the disposal unit and came back and sat down. There was a lot of work to do. There is a thing that humans do when they are very angry and very patient at the same time. They build. The Seluhari have a word for it. Loosely translated, it means the quiet work of the long answer. Most species in the galaxy do not have a word for it because most species do not do it long enough to need one. The shipyard did not appear on any council registry. It did not appear on any human public record either. It existed in a system that the council's navigational charts described as resource depleted and survey incomplete, which was accurate in the sense that the survey had been done by a human team who filed a report that said nothing interesting is here, which was technically the most interesting thing they had ever done. The yard was built inside a hollowed asteroid, which meant from outside it looked like a rock. Rocks are very common in space. Nobody looks at rocks. Admiral Saranandi had been inside the yard 4 times over 12 years. Each time she came, there was more. The first time, there were 6 ships in the cradles. The last time, she stopped counting at 60 and simply looked at the shape of the fleet as a whole, the way you look at a forest instead of a tree. She was not a person who wasted time on feelings about things she had already decided. But she stood on the upper platform for a few minutes, looking down the rows, and she allowed herself to notice what 30 years of quiet work looked like when it was finally standing up. The ships were not beautiful. That was the first thing other species would notice, if other species ever saw them, which was not the plan. No council ship designer would have produced something so plain. No Garathi admiral would have accepted hulls that gray and hulls that angular with no ceremony in the lines at all. That was because the ships had not been designed to be seen. They had been designed to arrive before anyone knew they were coming, do one specific thing with complete efficiency, and leave. Every targeting system aboard had been built around Garathi and Velhari naval doctrine, which human analysts had been studying for 22 years. Not to copy it, to understand exactly where it broke. Every council warship relied on a targeting lock sequence that took 4.2 seconds. Human engineers had built a jamming system that added 11 seconds to that process. It did not sound like much, until you understood that Nandi's ships could cover a lot of space in 11 seconds. The crews had been training for 3 years, not in combat simulations. In actual darkrun drills, Full silence, full blackout, flying the kinds of patterns that Council tactical models had never needed to account for because no species had ever flown them before. Humans had invented them for this specific purpose, and then practiced them until they were boring. Nandi received her orders on a Tuesday. She read them in her bunk with the lights low. They were 12 lines long. She read them twice, not because she did not understand them, but because she wanted to be certain she understood them completely before she carried them out. The orders listed targets, military installations, enforcement fleet staging areas, detention and processing facilities, Council weapons platforms. The orders also listed what was not a target. Every line of that section was longer than the target lines. She went to the operations room. Her senior crew were already there. They had been receiving the same data feeds she had. Nobody asked her what was happening. They had been working toward this for long enough that when it arrived, it felt less like a surprise and more like a thing that had finally come into view. She told them the timeline. She told them the sequencing. She told them to sleep if they could because in 40 hours they would have a great deal to do, and she needed them thinking clearly. One of her younger officers, a navigation specialist named Dev, asked her one question. He asked if they were going to win. Nandi thought about the word win for a moment. It was not quite the right word for what they were about to do. What they were about to do was closer to correcting something, resetting something that had gone wrong. She told him that the Council had built their military power over 3 centuries of being the only species in the galaxy that had thought carefully about how to use it. Humans had spent 30 years thinking about nothing else except how to undo it. She said that advantage does not expire. Dev nodded. He went to sleep. Nandi stayed in the operations room. She pulled up the route maps. She pulled up the targeting sequences. She went through each one the way a careful person checks a list, not because they have forgotten anything, but because a careful person checks anyway. At some point during the night, a logistics officer left a meal on the desk beside her. She ate it without looking at it, still reading. She thought about the footage once. She had watched it the same day everyone else had. She had not watched it again. Once was enough to understand what it was. Once was enough to know why the orders said what they said. She did not think about it again after that. There was too much work. In the asteroid around her, 60-something ships sat in the dark and waited. They were very good at waiting. They had learned it from the people who built them. The Galactic High Council chamber was built to make visitors feel small. This was not an accident. The ceilings were 60 meters high. The floor was polished black stone that reflected everything above it, so that anyone standing in the center appeared to be standing over an endless drop. The tiers of seating rose on all sides like a coliseum, and at any full session there were representatives of 31 species looking down from above. Earth's ambassador, a man named Len Akafer, had been inside the chamber twice before, both times as an observer. Both times he had sat quietly in the lower gallery and taken notes. This time he walked to the center of the floor alone, and he stood on the black stone, and he did not look up at the tiers. He was 51 years old. He had been a trade negotiator for 19 years before becoming an ambassador. He had a habit of keeping his hands in front of him, loosely joined, the way a person stands when they have absolutely no intention of being rushed. Councillor Drackle sat in the senior tier in his crimson and gold robes. He had agreed to this session because refusing it would have looked worse than granting it. He expected a formal protest. He expected emotional language about the incident. He had prepared a response that acknowledged the sensitivity of the matter while affirming council jurisdiction. Akafer reached into his jacket and removed a small data chip. He placed it on the central transmission platform. A list appeared on every screen in the chamber. 47 locations. Each one was a council military installation, enforcement staging area, or weapons platform. Coordinates, classification level, current garrison strength. The chamber went quiet in the specific way that large rooms go quiet when something unexpected happens. HFY said, "In 18 hours these installations will no longer be operational. I am not asking for a negotiation. I am not presenting a demand. I am informing you as a courtesy, because we believe in the value of information." He reached into his jacket again and removed a second chip. He placed it beside the first. The screen changed. It showed Ava Reyes, her name, her age, her assignment record, her volunteer certifications. A photograph of her in Corridor 7, kneeling beside a Velhari child, passing over a medical pack. Then the footage Rowe had recorded. HFY let it play to the end. He did not speak while it played. When it finished, he said, "Her name was Ava Reyes. She was 23 years old. She was distributing fever medication to children in a non-restricted humanitarian corridor. She asked twice to be informed of the charge against her. She was not informed. She is the reason for the list." Drackle stood. His voice carried the practiced weight of someone accustomed to filling large rooms with authority. He said the council did not accept ultimatums from member-adjacent species. He said human-civilian activity in council-adjacent space had been operating outside established protocol for years. He said this session was over, and the ambassador would be detained pending a review of his diplomatic credentials. He gestured to the chamber guards. HFY watched the guards move toward him. He did not step back. He said, "The 18-hour window began 4 minutes ago." The guards stopped, not because of the words, because of the tone. It was the tone of someone who had said the most important thing they had to say and was now simply waiting for it to be understood. HFY was escorted out, not detained. The council's legal office sent a very fast note to Drackle's office advising that detaining a speaking ambassador carried its own set of complications, and Drackle, who was angry but not stupid, let it go. Councillor Yessa watched from her tier. She had not spoken during the session. She watched HFY walk out of the chamber with his hands loosely joined in front of him, unhurried, and she felt something move through her that she later described to an aide as the particular cold feeling of watching someone leave a room they were never afraid to be in. She pulled up the list of 47 installations on her personal screen. She looked at it for a long time. She sent a message to her staff. It said, "Begin monitoring all human communication channels, all frequencies beginning now." 17 hours and 41 minutes later, her screen lit up. All 47 installations had gone dark simultaneously. No distress signals, no emergency beacons, no debris clouds that council sensors could detect at the nearest relay points. Just 47 presences on the galactic map that had been there for decades and were now absent. The chamber was called back into emergency session. 31 species, a great deal of noise, a great deal of competing theories. Drackle said it was sabotage, internal system failures, coordinated but explicable. He said the council's military response would be swift and decisive. He sent 3 response fleets to the coordinates of the disappeared installations. The fleets arrived. There was nothing to respond to. There was nothing to fight. There was just empty space where something used to be. HFY sent a message from a location the council could not trace. It contained a single attachment. A new list. 61 locations this time. At the bottom of the message, 3 words, "Our courtesy continues." Yessa read the message in her office. She sat very still for a while. Then she began composing a communication of her own, not to Drackle, not to the chamber, but to a private channel that she had been maintaining for 11 years for a situation she had hoped would never come. She did not know if it would be received in time. She sent it anyway. The council's war doctrine was built on a principle that had worked for 300 years. Show overwhelming force early, and the other side loses the will to continue before the actual fighting begins. It was effective. It had ended 7 conflicts before they became wars. The Council called it resolution through presence and considered it one of their more elegant contributions to galactic order. It required the other side to be watching. Admiral Nandi's fleet did not announce itself. It did not form up in view of Council sensors and wait to be seen. It moved in fragments, each ship running dark, following routes that a Council tactical model would have identified as inefficient because they avoided the direct paths between points and took longer to travel. That was the point. The routes were longer. They were also invisible. A Council border station designated KR-7 was responsible for monitoring the approach lanes to the Garathi home cluster. It had a crew of 212. It had been operational for 40 years. It had very good sensors that were pointed in the directions that ships were expected to come from. Nandi's ships came from a direction that KR-7's sensors were not pointed. This was not luck. Human analysts had spent 4 years mapping the sensor coverage of every major Council installation on the target list, looking for the gaps. Every installation had gaps. The Council had never needed to close them because no species had ever bothered to find them. KR-7 went dark at 03:14 station time. The crew was not present when it happened. They had been evacuated 6 minutes earlier by a human ship that had docked at the station's secondary maintenance port, the port used for supply deliveries, which did not trigger the same alert protocols as a military approach, and informed the crew that a critical reactor fault had been detected and that they needed to move to emergency evacuation pods immediately. The crew evacuated. The pods were recovered by a Council patrol ship 40 minutes later. All 212 crew members were alive, unhurt, and deeply confused. KR-7 was then taken offline by the team that had remained aboard. Permanently but cleanly. No explosion, no fire, just a sequence of irreversible shutdowns performed by engineers who had memorized the station's schematics from documents that a Council maintenance contractor had been filing in unencrypted format for 22 years. This was how most of it went. Not all of it. The Garathi Enforcement Fleet staging area near Vethun Station had a standing garrison that scrambled fast when the first of its outer platforms went dark. 12 Garathi warships came out ready for a fight. They could not get a targeting lock. This was the part that the Garathi commanders would describe later. In debriefs, they filed with a Council that no longer had the authority to receive them, as the moment they understood something was genuinely wrong. Garathi targeting systems were the best in the known galaxy. They had never failed in live combat in 3 centuries. They failed now because Nandi's ships were moving in patterns that the targeting computers had never been trained on. The computers kept modeling where the ships were going based on where ships should go, which was based on how every other species in the galaxy flew. Humans, it turned out, had designed their attack patterns specifically to not match any prior model. The Garathi fleet commander, a veteran named Ors, tried to adapt. He was smart and he was fast, and under different circumstances, he would have been a difficult opponent. He began issuing manual targeting commands, bypassing the automated systems. By the time his crews switched to manual, the staging area's weapons platforms were already gone. Ors pulled his fleet back. He filed a report. He wrote in the report that he had encountered a form of tactical approach that existing doctrine had no category for, and that he recommended the Council convene an immediate review. The Council did not convene a review. The Council was busy with the fact that the second list was now also gone. Councillor Yessa had been monitoring everything from her office. She had her staff tracking every Council asset on both lists in real time. She watched them go out one by one, on a screen that looked like a map of stars slowly going dark. She sent a message to the human communication channel she had found. It said, "I voted against the execution order. I have documentation. I am willing to surrender Counselor Drackle personally in exchange for cessation. I want nothing for myself. She received a reply 11 minutes later. It said, "Your message has been received." That was all. She read it 3 times. She did not know if it was a good sign. She decided to act as though it was, because the alternative was to sit and watch her screen, and that was becoming very difficult. She went to Drackle's office. She told his aide it was urgent. The aide let her in because she was a senior counselor, and because the last 2 hours had made everyone on Varanthos very willing to let senior counselors go wherever they wanted. Drackle was standing at his own screen watching the same map she had been watching. He had his arms crossed. He had the expression of someone who had made a decision that had seemed very clear at the time and was now less clear. Yessa said, "It is not going to stop." He said, "The response fleet will engage them." She said, "There is nothing to engage. That is the entire problem." He looked at her. He said, "What do you suggest?" She said, "I suggest you come with me." He did not move. Nandi's fleet was already on the 3rd list. Outside Drackle's window, Varanthos was beautiful. Tall buildings and wide boulevards. Ancient and proud. The capital of a political structure that had governed the galaxy for 3 centuries and had made the mistake of believing that 3 centuries was the same thing as permanent. Drackle did not go quietly. He made 3 separate attempts to reach his private transport, each one blocked by staff who had stopped following his orders and started following the new emergency governance protocols that Yessa had filed through the Council's own administrative system. Correctly, in triplicate, using the exact legal framework that Drackle himself had championed 6 years ago to consolidate Council emergency powers. She had known that framework would be useful eventually. She had simply not known for whom. He was brought to the Council's own civil holding floor, which was a set of rooms that had technically existed for cases of internal misconduct, but had never actually been used. They were clean. They had windows. Yessa made sure of both because she was not interested in becoming the thing she was trying to end. Earth's response to her message came in full 40 hours after her first contact. It was not from Akafir. It was a document, 12 pages, formal, structured. It proposed a tribunal, not a human tribunal, a multi-species panel drawn from the populations that had been living under Council enforcement for the longest time. The Drenai, the Velhari. 3 smaller species that most people in the galaxy could not have named, because they had spent a century being too small for the Council to pay much attention to, which it turned out was its own kind of damage. Earth would provide all evidence from the Ava Ray's case and the 47 years of documented enforcement excesses it had been quietly compiling. Other species would provide the judges. The proceedings would be public. Yessa read the document twice. She sent back one word, agreed. The tribunal convened 6 weeks later on neutral ground, a station called Miros, which was Drenai administered and had never been inside Council jurisdiction. Drackle was transported there under escort. He sat at the center table in a room that was nothing like the Council chamber. No 60-meter ceilings. No black stone floors designed to make visitors feel small. Just a plain room with good lighting and representatives of 7 species who had each prepared testimony that ran, in total, to over 4,000 documented incidents. Drackle had a legal team. They were competent. They raised procedural objections on 12 separate points. The tribunal considered each one and ruled on each one and moved on. The trial lasted 9 days. The verdict was unanimous. His sentence was life imprisonment in a Drenai-administered facility. No execution. When a journalist from a human news agency asked Director Webb why Earth had not pushed for a harsher sentence, Webb said that Ava Rays had been killed without a trial, without a charge, without even the courtesy of being told why. He said the point was not to match that. The point was to be the opposite of it. The journalist wrote the quote down, and did not publish it for 3 days because she kept reading it and finding new things in it. The council did not dissolve. Yessa had argued against dissolution, and so had Earth, and so had most of the species who had the most reason to want it gone. The reasoning was practical. The galaxy needed coordination infrastructure, and building it from nothing took time that could be spent on things that mattered more. What dissolved was the enforcement arm. What dissolved was the doctrine of resolution through presence. What dissolved was the assumption that the largest species in the room got to define the rules for everyone else. What replaced it was slower and messier, and had a lot of arguments that went on too long. Yessa chaired the Reconstruction Council and found that she was good at letting people argue until the argument ran out on its own, which was slower than she would have liked but produced better outcomes. Earth participated. Earth sent people to working groups and submitted proposals and pushed back on things it thought were wrong and accepted being pushed back on in return. It did not try to run the process. Webb said, in a private meeting with Yessa that was later declassified, that humanity had spent 60 years being told it was too new and too small to have a real voice in galactic affairs. He said the answer to that was not to become the species that told everyone else they were too new and too small. He said they had won one argument. That did not make them right about everything else. Yessa told him she thought that was a very unusual thing for the species that had just dismantled the Council's military to say. Webb said he would take that as a compliment. Admiral Nandi stood down her fleet 38 days after the first list. She gave the order from the same platform where she had looked out over the shipyard before any of it began. The ships were not decommissioned. They went back into their cradles, in their asteroid, in their unremarkable system. Nandi filed the fleet's status as reserve, which was accurate, and left it at that. She did not give a speech. She had never been a person who made speeches. She went home. She had a sister in a city on the coast, and she had not seen her in 4 years. She spent 2 weeks doing very little. She went walking on the beach. She ate meals that had nothing to do with anything important. She slept for 8 hours a night, which was something she had not done in a long time. On Orvath Prime, Ro stood in Corridor 7. The orange work light still hummed above him. The lower market was slowly coming back. Vendors, families, the ordinary business of people who needed things and other people who had things to give. Near the wall, level with where the crates used to sit, someone had placed a flat stone. It had been there for 2 weeks. Nobody knew exactly who had put it first. Others had added small things around it, a pressed flower from a Draenei plant, a small Velhari luck token, a folded piece of paper with words in 6 languages. The stone had 2 things on it, a name, 2 dates. Ro stood there for a while. He did not need to read it. He had memorized it the day it appeared. Around him, a child was asking a parent something, and the parent was answering, and somewhere further down the corridor, someone was laughing at something small and ordinary and good. He stood there until he felt that was enough. Then he went back to work. That was all. That was everything.